Greetings, magical mavens. It's Afura here, the writing witch, and to viewers new and old, welcome to the first official video in our new cyclical living series for 2024 into 2025, the Astrology of the Wheel of the Year. If you're new around here, on this channel, we like to practice slow-ish seasonal living in alignment with the natural and powerful energies of the pagan Sabbats on the Wheel of the Year. But rather than trying to fit all of our magical activities into one day or one weekend or even 1 week surrounding the checkpoint on the Wheel of the Year, I like to look at the Wheel of the Year as a calendar of 8 seasons that are 6 weeks long, which liberates us from the concept of feeling like we have to cram everything into a certain day on the calendar, and it allows us to actually slow down a bit and experience the magic that can happen every day on the witch's calendar in between of the Sabbats. For the past few years on this channel, we've been focusing on that traditional Wheel of the Year with the 8 Sabbats and how to realistically incorporate their themes into our everyday lives to experience more fulfillment and fun. But to deepen our practice even more, this year we are zooming in even closer on that cycle of the seasons to learn even more about the details of the plant, tend, harvest, compost cycle that everything in the universe, including us, flows through in our lives by cutting up the year instead of into 8 sections, into 12 sections, the 12 Zodiac seasons. Did you know that the concept of the Wheel of the Year also encompasses Zodiac astrology? By living in tune with the energies of the seasons, including the Zodiac seasons, we're able to empower ourselves in a multitude of ways. If you missed it, I did a video recently to preface this series. In that video, I go into detail on exactly how astrology works and how it syncs up with the 8 Sabbats on the calendar of the witches. I highly recommend you go back and watch that one too. But in the meantime, here's a quick rundown of the premise of our new series. In this new cyclical living series, we'll be focusing on the basics of astrology, the 12 signs of the zodiac, and how they fit into the greater story of the seasons and Sabbats. Each sign corresponds to a 12th of the Wheel of the Year, and by looking at each zodiac season as a subsection of the 8 Sabbats of the witches, we're able to see a fuller picture of the energies of the seasons and our place within them. So if you're used to watching this channel, you know that one of our favorite things to do in this community, instead of looking at the Wheel of the Year as individual days on the calendar that we have to cram our celebrations and magical traditions into, we look at the whole year as being broken up into 8 seasons, with each of the 4 seasons having an early and a late part of it. So, for example, the Spring Equinox marks the beginning of spring, and Beltane marks the beginning of the end of spring, and so on. So what we're going to be doing in this series is essentially just breaking up that concept of seasons into 12 parts instead of the usual 8 parts that we like to work with. The zodiac seasons are also ruled over by elements. There are 4 elements, earth, air, fire, and water, and 12 signs. So that means that each element rolls over 3 signs. And since there are 2 masculine elements, fire and air, and 2 feminine elements, water and earth, this also means that the signs alternate between masculine and feminine each month, creating a natural state of balance that we can tap into as we learn to more easily give and receive in life. Other than being grouped by element, what makes each sign different is their modality or quality. They progress in a predictable chronological pattern. The first is cardinal, the second is fixed, and the third is mutable. The cardinal sign of each element indicates the start of a new season. The fixed sign of each element is consistent and sustaining, the height and epitome of a season, and the mutable sign of each element is changeable, transitioning into the next season. The seasons also fit perfectly into the Sabbat seasons of the Wheel of the Year, like I said, and each cardinal sign is the start of one of the 4 main overall seasons of the year. These are the solstices and the equinoxes. The fixed signs take place during the height of each season, which are represented by the Celtic fire festivals such as Imbolc, Beltane, Lammas, and Samhain. The mutable signs rule over the final phase of each season before the next solstice or equinox. Each sign's themes and symbols align with the themes of the Sabbath seasons they fall into, and plays a key role in the story of the plant, tend, harvest, compost cycle that all things in the universe, including us, are constantly evolving through. So where in our pagan wheel of the year, we split each main season into 2 parts, beginning and end, with the astrological wheel of the year, we're working with the same solstices and equinoxes as our structure, but we're splitting the sections between them into 3 parts instead of just 2. So the very beginning of the spring season is the cardinal sign, which is Aries. The middle or height of the spring season is the fixed sign, which is Taurus, and then the end of spring is the mutable sign, and that is Gemini. Essentially, with the Zodiac Wheel of the Year, it's not a separate system from the Pagan Wheel of the Year, it's just a more zoomed in, detailed version of it. So for us seasonal witches, what's really fun and mind-blowing about the seasonal living approach to astrology is that it allows us to very easily learn astrology through our understanding that each zodiac season is just a subsection of the Pagan Wheel of the Year that we're already living in tune with. By focusing on the themes of not just each of the overall Sabbath seasons, but also leaning in to embody its deeper and more detailed archetypes, I've been able to see dramatic growth in my life and a sense of balance and rest that keeps me feeling more stable, supported, fulfilled, and connected to nature. For the past few years, I've learned how astrology directly relates to the seasons and started living the astrology instead of just listening to astrologers talk about it. And now I'm passing along this powerful magic to you in this new year and a day journey into what I like to call the zodiacal subsections of the Pagan Wheel of the Year. And now, without further ado, let's dive into our seasonal living for the Aries season. Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, and it's considered the astrological new year. From a seasonal living perspective, the moment the sun moves into the sign of Aries is the astronomical spring equinox in the northern hemisphere, and the autumn equinox in the southern hemisphere. So while many of us in the pagan and witchy community tend to choose a day on the Gregorian calendar to celebrate Ostara every year, or Maban if you're down under, the modern calendar and the astrological calendar don't always match up perfectly, so the actual date of this occurrence can vary slightly from year to year. For example, I tend to think of the Spring Equinox Sabbath as taking place between March 20th and 22nd here in the Northern Hemisphere, but actually the sun moves into Aries this year on March 19th at about 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time specifically. Some practitioners like to be hyper-aware of the exact dates and times of the astrology each unique year as they're planning their observations, celebrations, and rituals. And while I find the idea of that really cool, if I'm being honest, in my authentic practice, I am far more concerned with a slow living / seasonal living approach to the witchy path, more so than exact dates. I do find it valuable to be aware of when the sun changes signs, but rather than worrying too much about that, I prefer to flow through the shift more fluidly as I gradually embody the themes of each season. An easy way to remember when to check the changing of the zodiac signs is to just keep in mind that it always happens within a few days of the 20th of every month on the Gregorian calendar. And if you're familiar with the Sabbats, you'll remember that the solstices and equinoxes always happen around the 20th of a month, and that is because they are perfectly aligned with the changing of certain zodiac signs. Aries energy is related to the divine masculine fire element, and its main theme is initiative. It also deals with themes of leadership, confidence, taking courageous action on our goals, setting intentions, and chasing our desires. The archetype of Aries is the warrior aspect of our journey, so Aries season invites us to be willing to get outside our comfort zone to pioneer a new path in life, business, or creativity. This period between about March 20th and about April 20th is a great time to set intentions related to rebirth, taking initiative, becoming more assertive, leadership, confidence, adventure, and re-energizing. Aries' alchemical element is fire, the element of passion, action, ambition, creativity, and movement. Aries' quality, or modality as it's called, is cardinal, the modality related to kickstarting a new season. In the case of Aries, it's both the start of the spring season in the northern hemisphere / the beginning of fall in the southern hemisphere, and it's also the start of the zodiac year. On the wheel of the year, Ostara, which corresponds to the spring equinox, aka the moment when the sun moves into Aries, is often represented as a time to plant seeds, both literally and metaphorically. The symbol for Aries is the ram, an animal that has a lot of forward-moving energy, ruggedness, initiative, and determination. The glyph looks kind of like the horns of a ram. The ruling planet is Mars, the planet named for the god of the warrior archetype in the ancient Greco-Roman pantheon. Named Aries by the Greeks and Mars by the Romans, he was the quintessentially quote-unquote masculine god of ambition and virility. And this theme of initiative, enthusiasm, and self-starting is also mirrored in its place in the zodiac wheel, being the ruler of the first house, aka the first sign of the zodiac. Each zodiac sign has a planetary ruler, and of course, the planet that corresponds with Aries is Mars. The key phrase for Aries is I am, and Aries represents birth, the passion to live, and the ego in our personal astrology. Now, I know the word ego gets a lot of negative connotations because when left unchecked, it can wreak absolute havoc in the world. But it's not inherently bad. The ego identity is the part of our psyche that keeps us alive and looks out for our survival and our individual expression. It's an important aspect of what makes us human and should be valued and balanced with the other aspects of life to achieve an embodiment of healthy masculinity rather than toxic, and that's regardless of your gender identity. We are all made up of a combination of masculine and feminine energy, and by approaching cyclical living in this way, we're able to help balance that within ourselves. And speaking of balance, just like every Sabbath has its opposite on the wheel of the year, so too does every sign of the zodiac. We're empowered to achieve balance each season by being mindful of the spectrum between the two. So just as the opposite of the spring equinox or Ostara is the autumn equinox or Mabon, the opposite of Aries is Libra, the cardinal sign that kicks off the fall season in the northern hemisphere 6 months later around the 20th of September. And of course, if you're in the southern hemisphere and Aries season is your autumn equinox, then Libra season takes place at your spring equinox in September. What we notice about these quote-unquote opposites is that they aren't true opposites, but just opposite sides of the same spectrum of themes. Aries/Ostara deals with themes of personal ambition, rebirth, and taking action, whereas Libra/Mabon deals with themes of compromising in relationships, releasing the old dead parts of ourselves, and beginning to slow down and turn towards inward healing. With Libra being ruled by Venus, the quintessential quote-unquote feminine counterpart of Aries or Mars, we can even think of it as a more feminine expression of those same themes on this particular spectrum. The universal themes of the Aries/Libra axis are the balance of independence versus relationship, the balance of action versus rest, and the balance of planting seeds versus composting that which has already run its course. And regardless of which hemisphere you're in, those same themes will be present, just in slightly different ways. And while we're on this subject of spectrums, I think it's important to address the hemispheres as they apply to the Wheel of the Year and the Zodiac Wheel. As we all know, the traditional Wheel of the Year, which modern pagans have borrowed from the Wicca religion, is oriented to the northern hemisphere. And based on my experience communing with witches from all over the world, it's most common for pagans in the southern hemisphere to reverse the Wheel of the Year appropriately to fit their seasons. And what's really magical about this concept of reversal is that it too reminds us not of the imperfection of the Wheel of the Year system, but actually of the perfect balance of the universe. You see, even though the southern hemisphere is celebrating the autumn equinox when my neck of the woods is celebrating the spring equinox, that doesn't render it contradictory that it's Aries season regardless of where we live. It actually still makes sense. Just as in the traditional Wheel of the Year, spring represents the astrological new year and the start of the growing season, autumn represents the start of a new harvest season, a time of year when many ancient cultures celebrated their new year. I don't know about you, but fall for me is just as much a season of rebirth and setting goals as spring is. So the idea that Aries season in March, the start of a new zodiac year, is also someone else's harvest season makes sense to me. That being said, I have zero experience living south of the equator, so if you have any insight on that, which I know some of my viewers do, I would love to get a conversation going down below. How do you see the balance of the Wheel of the Year when you look at it from your perspective? In our lives, as in nature, it's always important to maintain a sense of balance, and the Wheel of the Year demonstrates for us that balance comes in many different forms. It isn't always about a perfect state of neutral moderation. Aries season is an example of a time when the scales are tipped towards masculine or outgoing energy, but at the same time, the balance is there in the form of the little dot of yin within the yang side of the yin-yang symbol, so to speak. This is often exhibited in our witchy traditions as we celebrate the Wheel of the Year. In my practice as a domestic witch and a green witch, I have a fun tradition of harvesting or purchasing a winter squash the week of the autumn equinox and keeping it preserved over winter to be ritualistically cut at the spring equinox. I like to feast on the flesh of the squash in the spring as a celebration of gratitude, and then plant some of the seeds in my garden to be regrown. It's a harkening back to our ancestors, for the ability to keep things like winter squashes edible throughout the winter was a matter of survival to them. And in my modern practice, where food scarcity is less of a concern, it's a symbolic representation of my ability to experience abundance and safety through the challenges of life. It also represents just a full circle moment where I get to recognize my place within the universal cycle of life. But it goes even deeper than that. Just in that one super simple ritual with the squash, I'm embodying all parts of the spectrum of themes covered by the axis of the equinoxes. In planting the seeds at Aries season, I'm embracing that initiatory energy of early spring. Yet at the exact same time, by cutting up the squash for food and composting the inedible parts, I'm also revisiting the themes of harvest, gratitude, death, release, sacrifice, and decomposition that are more prominent in the fall, but still very much present in the spring. For no matter what the season, we can't have one side of the coin without the other. And interestingly enough, the actual astrology of each zodiac season supports this concept of balance. For every Aries season contains within it a full moon in the opposite sign of Libra. You see, when the sun is in any sign, the full moon has to take place in the opposite sign, because the full moon is a type of astrological transit known as an opposition, meaning that the sun and moon are on opposite sides of the solar system, which is why we're able to see the reflection of the sun's light illuminating the entire face of the moon. This year, the full moon in Libra is on March 25th, just a few days after the spring equinox and the start of Aries season. These are just the kinds of things in my witchy practice that get me really excited to nerd out over the wonder of the universe. By celebrating both the solar Sabbat and embracing its opposite by celebrating the full moon, we're able to accept the universe's gift of perfect balance within the same season. When we approach our cyclical living in this way, we're all embracing the same spectrum of themes, whether we're in the northern or southern hemisphere, just in different ways, which to me is another mind-blowing full circle moment. This idea of keeping up with astrology and moon signs used to really confuse and overwhelm me, until I learned to look at it from this cyclical living perspective. Now I've designed journal prompt pages and pre-scheduled posts in the Writing Witch Coven community to remind us of when the moon phases are, what sign they're in, and what questions to ask ourselves each week to naturally embrace their energies in practical and empowering ways. Now, if everything I just mentioned above isn't already mind-blowing enough, there's even more. There's also a way to tune into the balancing of all four elements within this cyclical living approach to astrology. Remember earlier when I said that the sun cycles through the 12 signs, leading it to also cycle through each of the 4 elements 3 times a year? Well, the moon actually does the exact same thing, only on a monthly basis instead of yearly. During each moon cycle, the moon spends a couple of days in each of the 12 signs. And when we take note of the 4 main phases of the lunar cycle, being the new moon, the first quarter, the full moon, and the waning quarter, we get a perfect dose of all 4 elements. Surrounding this Aries season, we have the first quarter waxing moon in the sign of Cancer, the cardinal sign of the feminine water element. Then the next week is that full moon in Libra we talked about, the cardinal sign of the masculine air element. Then there's the last quarter moon in Capricorn, the cardinal sign of the feminine earth element. Finally, the following week, we have the new moon in Aries, the cardinal sign of the masculine fire element. This is that obligatory conjunction between the sun and moon that results in the predictable new moon that happens in the same sign as the sun every zodiac season. Now, notice that I've intentionally pointed out how all 4 of these moon phases are taking place in cardinal signs, which reinforces the overarching theme of Aries season being a time of new beginnings. And notice how we can tune into the elements and their alternating masculine and feminine affinities to be both exerting energy effectively and being open to receive the benefits of doing so. And from there, we shift out of this chapter of cardinal energy and into a new pattern relating to the fixed signs of the zodiac in time for Taurus season in April. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I really wasn't consistent with lunar astrology until fairly recently, because in our busy lives, this practice of paying attention to the lunar astrology can seem totally overwhelming unless you have an understanding of how and why the signs are paired with the phases, as well as having a good system in place well in advance. But after committing to practicing it for a while, I saw how magical, inspiring, and beneficial it could be in my cyclical living practice. And that's why I front-loaded the work of researching the dates of the phases and signs and creating prompts and notifications that not only remind me of when they are, but also provide a super simple template for learning the patterns and embodying the themes. I've done all of this work for you and for myself so that we can enjoy the flow of it going forward. So if this aspect of cyclical living inspires you, but you don't want it to take up too much time and energy each week, or you tend to have a hard time keeping up with it, then the Writing Witch Coven is for you. It's also for you if you're feeling really inspired by all of this mind-blowing information from this video. This series is going to be packed with powerful information that you're going to want to remember and implement. And since I want you to be able to retain and use this in empowering ways, you don't have to worry about writing all of this down. Members of our Build Your Grimoire tier in the Writing Witch Coven on Patreon are receiving a grimoire chapter for their binder this month that's essentially a written version of everything we went over in this video. But regardless of which tier you decide to join, all Coven members get support to stay consistent in our cyclical witchy lifestyles by tuning into a few journal prompts per week that keep us in tune with the Sabbath seasons, zodiac wheel, and moon phases, all of which work together to guide our well-balanced practice. Each member receives my beautifully designed grimoire prompt pages, as well as notifications when it's an important astrological phase or seasonal checkpoint, so you never have to feel like you're falling out of tune with the cycles of nature. Depending on which tier you decide to join, you'll get access to lunar astrology prompts only, or you can upgrade to join us for the yearly Seasonal Living Challenge, where we journal and set intentions on the themes of the 8 Sabbats in the 6 weeks surrounding each checkpoint on the Wheel of the Year. And we actually just started a new cycle of this with brand new journal prompts for 2024. Or better yet, you can upgrade all the way to the top tier, which gets access to all of the above, plus a handmade Book of Shadows binder from me and a whole new set of themed information and prompt pages every month, which in 2024 include a beautiful transcript of each zodiac video, such as this one. Okay, so now that we're done nerding out about the what and the why of Aries season and where it fits into the Wheel of the Year, let's shift into embodiment by delving into the how to embrace the season. Here are 4 powerful themes of Aries season using the 4 elements as a guide. How you go about embodying these ideas will differ depending on what your goals and practice are like, but for real-world examples, I'll be sharing how I'm embracing these themes as I take up my dream of homesteading this Aries season. You can plan to focus on one theme per week in alignment with the elements of the 4 main moon phases we discussed above, or you can simply go about them whenever you feel inspired to do so throughout the season. Water. Programmed water to energize your goals. Did you know that water can be programmed like a crystal? In my practice, I tend to charge any and all water I handle in my day-to-day life simply by bringing mindfulness to it. Anytime I'm about to handle water in any way, I've trained my brain to automatically pause from whatever random thoughts may be floating around in my head, and I shift over to a mindful mantra or incantation. I repeat my affirmations in my head as I'm brushing my teeth, as I'm flushing the toilet, showering, making my coffee, washing dishes and laundry, even when I'm staining pages with water-based dye for the Writing Witch shop. In that case, I program it for abundance for my business as well as positive vibes for the person receiving the order. But to really tie this practice in with the spring season, I love to also program the water I use to nurture my houseplants and seedlings. At the spring equinox, the days are now much longer than they were over winter, and they're about to start being longer than the nights, which is quite fitting for the start of Aries season, a time when the creative fire ambitiously takes the lead. Here in my northern climate, the garden is dormant over winter, and even the houseplants stop growing as much due to the lack of heat and light. Fertilizing or overwatering them can very easily overwhelm and kill plants over the winter, and I've learned that the hard way in the past. Being an Aquarius, I love to pour nurturing water all over everything, but I have to learn to do that moderately and in tune with the seasons. But at the spring equinox, that starts to shift in a very noticeable way. It's around this time that I start seeds indoors in preparation for the gardening season ahead, and I also start noticing that my houseplants are growing more and I start watering and fertilizing them. So to evoke the energy of new beginnings and forward-moving manifestation, I often charge my watering can with my intentions for the season and year ahead at this time. This can be done simply through your words, your thoughts, or your hands as you're pouring the water. But to get a little extra witchy with it, you can also add additional magical elements to this practice. You can place a clear container of water on the windowsill during the day to soak up and magnify the sun's powerful rays, harnessing that fiery Aries energy. This can also help to purify the water and bring it to a more comfortable temperature for your plants, which will also help them to grow better. Air, mindset magic. With Aries being the season for planting seeds for manifestation, it also makes sense for it to be a time of getting your mindset on board with your intentions. For taking random action instead of genuinely inspired action towards your goals can lead to burnout very quickly. While your mindset magic can be a more active form of spiritual work, such as breath work, EFT tapping, or doing manifestation journaling techniques like the ones discussed in my book, Manifestation Journal Magic, it can also be more on the mundane side of things. For me, spring is often a time when I'm actively learning new skills and deepening my knowledge by taking action. When we combine the mental themes of the air element with the active, results-driven energy of the fiery Aries season, the result is hands-on experience. And this is a prime example of how the Aries-Libra axis looks in action. This is a season of getting our hands dirty, so to speak, and shifting from armchair knowledge into active practicing. For me this year, this is taking the form of learning and trying as much as I can in the way of homesteading. Fire, embracing transformation. Fire is the alchemical element most often associated with speed, passion, drive, and transformation, making Aries season a perfect time to actively transform yourself in some immediate way. While I strongly believe that big change comes from small, repeated actions over time, there is definitely also something to say for there being a time and place for getting fired up or getting a fire under your ass to make quicker, more dramatic shifts. And Aries season is definitely one of those times. If there are any plans or intentions you've been sitting on since the New Year's time, the spring equinox, which I think is almost a better time for acting upon resolutions than in January, Aries season can be your invitation to move into action on those goals. It isn't necessarily about throwing yourself into something with no safety net or setting yourself up for burnout. It's more so about getting the forward-moving energy going in whatever way that's best. I like to think of the first quarter of the year, which to me is the winter solstice to the spring equinox, as a time of starting to internally embody the goals and intentions for the year. And then once the spring equinox happens and we're into Aries season, is the time for making sure that we are getting that fire under us to take action on it. Going back to my homesteading example, the winter season was a good time to dream up ideas for my garden, to purchase seeds and other supplies and things like that, and to do a lot of learning behind the scenes. But Aries season is a great time to start actually preparing the garden physically, building the garden beds, even if that just looks like starting a compost bucket or taking advantage of a snow-free day to mark out the area of the yard that will get the most sunlight, and putting some cardboard down to get a head start on blocking out the weeds in the grass. Earth, creating a game plan. The earth element is relevant to the season as it pertains to creating stable foundations and getting grounded in our intentions and desires. The best way to set ourselves up for success is to get our footing in whatever it is that we're creating. Even if some of the physical, tangible, or 3D aspects of our manifestations haven't materialized yet, we can still embrace the earth element by getting grounded in our why factors and creating at least a loose outline to create some sense of structure around how we plan on achieving our goals. For my goal of establishing a thriving homestead, this season is vital for mapping out my garden, acquiring the seeds I want to grow if I haven't done so already, and learning as much as I can about things that will be new to me this year, like pest control, now that I'll be gardening in an open, natural area rather than a city apartment patio. In my research, I've heard that many new homesteaders make the mistake of underestimating how much food will become ripe all at once and can get overwhelmed with trying to preserve everything before it goes bad. So I'm also looking much farther ahead and researching how to preserve the foods that I plan on growing once harvest season comes. See, there we go again with that Ostara, Mabon / Aries Libra axis of themes going on. So how are you feeling inspired to take action on your desires this Aries season? I would love to know, so let's get a conversation going in the comments. And be sure to join us in the Writing Witch Coven, where you can get access to beautiful grimoire pages and prompts and reminders, so you never have to feel like you're falling behind or that you're not being consistent in your cyclical living practice. And speaking of seasonal astrology, it's that time of year again when I'm honored to invite you to join me, my astrology mentor, Tanae Stewart, and several other witches for the Empowered Modern Witches Festival this Ostara. The live virtual event is starting super soon on March 18th and it goes through the 20th, the week of the Spring Equinox in the Northern Hemisphere, the perfect time to set intentions for the cosmic year ahead. It's totally free to attend and features an incredible lineup of witches, astrologers, and authors, and all of us will be sharing our diverse perspectives on how you can have a more consistent spiritual practice and live your most magical life. I'll be presenting on how to naturally integrate the powerful themes of the Sabbats into your everyday life for a realistic, consistent magical practice year-round. And I'm also going to be going in depth on harnessing the magic of the spring season to plant your seeds of intention for a fulfilling year ahead. Other presentation topics include how to create consistent rituals based on your astrology chart, tarot readings to spring forward into the new year, practical magic for busy witches, leaning into the messy magic of life, establishing a consistent divination ritual, daily glamour magic for personal empowerment, cultivating consistency with the moon phases, divination practices with the astrological transits this year, and the magic of daily tea spell rituals. The summit is hosted by my friend Tanae Stewart, the Witch of Lupin Hollow and the author of The Modern Witch's Guide to Natural Magic, and I can't wait to collaborate with her and these other presenters. The replays will be available if you can't make the live sessions, but you must be signed up with your email to get access. It's starting really soon, so definitely check out the link that's on the screen now, which will also be linked down below, to get your free ticket. See you there! And for more ideas on how to celebrate the spring equinox, I invite you to check out this video right here. Blessed be!